Thank you. This is the last talk before lunch. I understand how difficult that can be. It's for me as well. I'm really hungry. Please bear with me, okay? For better or worse, my talk will be a little bit different because I have to confess I'm not a real scientist. I'm a political scientist, one of the social scientists in the room. I work at Peace Research Institute Frankfurt in the Department on International Security, and I have been working for a number of years on Antarctic geopolitics. So this is where I am coming from here as well. And also my talk is not about research results. I don't have any cool plots or animations to show you. What I'm here for is I want to share some thoughts with you about something that I consider a potential future governance issue for the Antarctic that will, come to your desks at some point as well, I assume. Okay, so I'm here to extend an invitation to start a conversation about this that is interdisciplinary. Oceanographers talking to glaciologists, talking to political scientists, and maybe some lawyers or legal scholars. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the idea of glacial geoengineering. It's an idea, it's a fiction, it doesn't exist yet, okay? And because you are, I'm sorry to say so, a really interesting sample, by show of hand, can you just briefly raise your hand if you have heard of these kind of cryosphere interventions? So that's a large number. I love that, that's fantastic. Thanks for that, that's a great outcome already for me. So I do not have to talk too much about this, right? You know these ideas here. This is what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. This is a niche, but a growing academic debate. It had obviously found resonance in the scientific factor. To the best of my knowledge, this was the first paper in 2018 by Moore et al. But it's gaining traction outside of academia as well. And my guess would be that a lot of you know about this from this novel here by Kim Stanley. And I see head nodding, and that's great as well. And by Kim Stanley Robinson, The Ministry for the Future, where a major subplot talks about researchers, Antarctic researchers, just like you, embarking on Project Slowdown, first with quite a bit of hesitance, but then research money was looming, and it worked in the novel, which was great, and it led to amazing research data too in the novel, okay? Let's see how this plays out in real life. I think we'll all witness it, for better or worse. But I also want to inform you, and I'm not sure whether you've known that, but the first engineering firms are included in these discussions as well as Acre Solutions. Teams have been to Greenland, talking to communities there about whether there is a local acceptance for such installations or not, and how that acceptance could maybe raised, okay? From my perspective, I'm kind of amazed by how little attention the political dimensions of glacial geoengineering have received. Most of these papers, for good reason, focus on technical feasibility or environmental impacts, but there were very few hints at the political ramifications of such cryosphere interventions. There were hints at ethical considerations. Is allowing a pristine glacier to waste away worth forcing 1 million people from their homes? These are big questions, ethical questions. There were hints at trade-offs between economics and ecology. In the case of Greenland, that's what they're talking about here, including labor migration, for example. And then more recently, coming to an area that I'm more familiar with, the Antarctic Treaty System, they ask in kind of trying to build a case for why the Antarctic Treaty consultative parties should consider such installations. Why would they deny ice sheet conservation? Isn't there an enlightened self-interest that could motivate them to do so? Studying geopolitics, I have to tell you that, unfortunately, I haven't come across that enlightened self-interest yet. So I think that deserves looking into this a little bit further. So what I'm interested in are these two questions for now. What do these cryosphere interventions mean for the Antarctic Treaty System? So very concretely, and what are wider geopolitical risks and constraining as well as enabling factors for that? I'm drawing on my research fields, my expertise, which lies in critical geopolitics, international relations, as well as Earth system governance. What this is not about, at least not yet, because as I said, I would like to extend an invitation to an interdisciplinary conversation about this, are these ethical questions that I've already referred to, that have been hinted at this one paper. Are these cryosphere interventions appropriate? Are these desirable? Okay, that is a big conversation that a lot of us should have together. And legal questions. What's the legal status of such interventions? Are these big research experiments? Or is that more like a research station that is built there to be there for decades? What does that mean legally? Are we setting legal precedents here? That matters for the governance system. And we would have to use the expertise of colleagues who are more versed in these questions from philosophy, from law, from history. I have started to talk with some colleagues, some polar legal experts to debate these questions. So for today, what I want to start this conversation in a way is to make 4 points. One, I really want to emphasize that this is unprecedented if such infrastructures are really coming into existence in the Antarctic because of their large scale. These will be critical infrastructures because once if they do so successfully stop sea level rise, you have to maintain them. Otherwise, you've bought yourself some time maybe. And then I, from my disciplinary background, would like to make 3 points about authority, sovereignty, and security. Okay, so that first point, if we look into that literature, how that is imagined, that or how different glacial geoengineering infrastructures are imagined, these are large-scale infrastructures. In some cases, if they are systems that pump up meltwater, glacial water, refreeze it, that needs a lot of energy, and you have to get that there somewhere. In the novel, you might remember, it's somehow beamed from space. That's the solution. Not sure how far we are there with technology. But here, the scientists involved speak of large offshore wind farms. But that's, I mean, unprecedented, right? And in a more recent paper, the other very prominent idea is this idea of a curtain that kind of allows that cold cavity that we have heard about earlier this morning underneath the ice shelf to be intact again, or to remain intact. But that down here is actually the last sentence of that paper. Hundreds of years of commitment to maintain and to ensure the long-term governance of sea level rise management means that governance, funding, and social license must go far beyond the 29 consultative parties of the Antarctic Treaty System. I mean, that's the last sentence. That would be my first sentence for the work that I am doing. So I think we have a lot of opportunity here to talk together. But that what is envisioned here is an absolute revolution of Antarctic governance. Nothing beyond that. That would be a total revolution. So let me talk about authority. And it comes down to the question, who makes the decisions here? Who makes the decisions about deploying such glacial geoengineering infrastructures in the first place? Who has the authority? So capability plus legitimacy, authority, to lock in these intergenerational decisions. Who claims to act on whose behalf? And can those 29 ATCPs who have in the past have faced the criticism that they are self-selecting bunch of rich countries, can they act, and a lot of them high emitters, claim legitimately to act in the interest of mankind in that regard? So that would be a question of Antarctica 2.0. And how are the benefits and burdens distributed here with regard to these decisions? How can the communities most affected from sea level rise partake in the decision-making here? Is the Antarctic Treaty System ready for that? That would mean institutional reforms that we haven't seen. And I just want to refer to this paper here by a colleague, Peter Roberts, who asked, does the science criterion rest on thin ice? And he raises that question exactly. The second point that I want to make here is about sovereignty. Who funds, who builds and maintains these infrastructures? We all know sovereignty is frozen. For you researchers going down to the ice, it doesn't really matter. But it matters, at least for where the infrastructure that you use is being built. There are strategic interests here at play where new infrastructure is being built. And long-term geoengineering sites, again, remember these will have to be built for a long time to be there and work. Are we assuming that the treaty, who has worked really well for 60 years, is just automatically continuing to work for another 60 years, right? And what's after that? Like, if we build these infrastructures, they're probably there to be there for a longer time. So these are questions that we have to ask. Who owns, who funds, who monitors, who owns the data that is inevitably coming out of these infrastructures? Who maintains the infrastructure? So ownership and liability questions are important here. Here we're getting into legal territory, but these are important questions. And obviously international cooperation is needed in that regard on an unprecedented scale. But I would like to remind you that we still do not have a single internationally planned, built, and managed research station. So often when it comes to building infrastructure, the international cooperation in the Antarctic spirit hits a certain limit, but we would need something like that here in a context of growing strategic competition. I mean, I told you that I'm studying geopolitics. At least since last year, 2022, international affairs are not what they were before, okay? So a dose of realism, unfortunately, here. And the last point, security. Who monitors, who protects these infrastructures, and who fears whom or what? These are critical infrastructures, I've hinted at that, such as dams or nuclear power plants. And we're seeing that, unfortunately, in the Russo-Ukrainian war at the moment, how they have been targeted. So there are no limits here, unfortunately. And these infrastructures could, in theory, I mean, again, this is fiction to a degree, right? But it's plausible to assume that they could be targeted for political blackmail by terrorists or by nefarious states. So they will need to be monitored and secured. Access to them will need to be policed, right? And just the anticipation of that will lead to a securitization. Whether that targeting is in the end happening or not, it will lead to a securitization of those infrastructures. And that will put the use of force and the presence of police or military into a whole new territory that we haven't seen in the Antarctic as well. And it's also not plausible to see non-state actors. The current system is very much geared towards nation states, but I mean, we have Elon Musks in this world, right? What are these guys thinking in one way or the other, and how are they using their money? So we need to think about how we could police that, regulate that as well. So here's that invitation again to start a conversation. I'd love to learn what you think about this. Really, but I think that this is not just an Antarctic issue. It will probably start in Greenland for obvious reasons. It's an easy environment to operate in, lower costs. The legal and geopolitical issues are less relevant. The main organizing principle of international affair, territorial sovereignty, exists there, but it's contested because of the independence movement of the Greenland people from Denmark against the backdrop of a history of colonization and militarization. So it's not easy, but it might be easier than in the Antarctic. And there are higher stakes in Europe, possibly. From what I'm learning from you guys, the AMOC might play a role here. So the stakes are higher for Europe in Greenland than they are in the Antarctic. So I think in order to assess the feasibility and desirability, as well as the conflict potentials, we should have that interdisciplinary debate, glaciologists talking to geologists, to political scientists, and to legal scholars from the Antarctic as well as the Arctic. So yeah, please get in touch. I'd be really curious to know what you think about this and how we could start or continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Maybe there's one pressing question, or else we would move on to go to lunch.
Over lunch. Let's have lunch together. Thank you.
And